How would you build around a more than a century-old beloved historic building? This is the question Finegold Alexander architects have been asking for the decades that the firm has completed addition renovation projects of historic public library buildings, which is what we have again at the Jones Library in Amherst, Massachusetts, and JV Fletcher Library in Westford. You're listening to What's the Scope with Finegold Alexander Architects, the podcast where we share our hands-on approach to projects and how we love to celebrate design that is boundless. I'm your host, Madison Mercado, a marketing coordinator at the firm, and in this third episode of our library design series, we're heading to the sites of the two library projects we have in construction. Well, not to the sites themselves, but with two of the architects who are working on them in the construction administration phase. They'll detail how the design respects the historic buildings and some unforeseen circumstances that have come up when demolishing a building that has undergone multiple renovations before the firm stepped in.
Good. All right. I'm Micajah Tucker. I'm an architect here at Finegold Alexander. I've been working, I guess, as an architect for about 6 years, but this is the first library project that I've worked on.
I'm Dan Wilder, and I'm a project architect, I guess, here at Finegold Alexander. I've been with Finegold for 3-ish years now, and been working in the field for about 15 years, I guess. And I am currently working on my first library project.
Interesting that you're both new to libraries.
Yeah, and even though Dan has been working for significantly more experienced, I guess, than I am, but also your first library project. So
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah. Done a bunch of other weird stuff, but not libraries.
Welcome to What's the Scope, our podcast. Glad to have you here. Today, we're just going to talk about libraries and construction mostly, since both of you are on 2 of the 3 libraries that the firm currently has active, and which are the 2 of the 3 that are also currently under construction. So I kind of wanted to ask you to each go over, your respective library that you're working on. Just tell me about the building, how far into the construction process each building is, and anything about how it's going.
Okay. So I'm currently working on the Jones Library, which is it's the town library for Amherst, Massachusetts. And it is currently under construction. Steel is going up right now. It was a big addition to the original library. Original library is built in 1927, and there have been a lot of surprises, as is usual with a historic renovation type building.
And then I'm working on the JV Fletcher Library in Westford, Massachusetts. So it's interesting. I think these 2 libraries have had a similar time frame to now they're both in construction. I think one of them Jones might have started design before JV Fletcher, but now they're both in construction. Both have steel going up kind of in a similar spot. Also have had some surprises along the way. But this building, the original library was built, I think, in 1895, and then there have been at least 2 additions in the 1960s and the 1980s, and now 2020s we're adding on again to the library.
Yeah, they are pretty similar projects, especially in that they're both ad renos, they're both historic buildings, I think, and I think they're similar to almost every library project that the firm does, minus maybe like 1 or 2, in that it is an ad reno onto a historic building.
And also a demolition of a previous addition that is no longer serving the purpose. Jones has got that going on as well.
Right. When you were in the design process for these in early construction, how did you work around having to keep the historic part of the building intact, since that was the decision that both libraries went with?
Yeah, I think it's really been a balance between keeping the historic elements, but then also trying to make room for, I guess, new technology or just expanding the library. because there's more users or the collections have changed. I think one example for JV Fletcher, if you look at the library actually on Google Maps right now, because it's in construction, they've actually updated some of the satellite imagery, so you can see how the footprint of the library is being almost doubled, like just from above, which is kind of interesting to see. I'm assuming just with more users and also like the size of the collections that they had. But kind of within that change with the collections, there was one room that had a skylight that was covered up at one point because the slide projector was introduced. I don't know the exact year that the slide projector was introduced, but there was too much light coming in through the skylight and the lay lights, so they had some plywood they put on top of it and then painted it just with like some clouds and like a little sky blue mural on top of it. So kind of part of this process in the renovation is we actually are removing the nicely painted plywood and then I guess restoring that skylight. So the room will no longer be really for slide projections. I guess there's still a projector in the room, but it's almost taking something that was from the historic and bringing it back versus like everything's being, I guess, completely restored or replaced.
Yeah, and that's an example of something that was done to keep up with current technology at the time that is no longer relevant, to us. So it's interesting that you get these waves of technologies that come through and are no longer relevant. The Jones Library had particular problems because it was built in the 1920s, the old part, and at the time asbestos was all the rage as a new and exciting construction material, which we are now having to deal with.
Right.
Yeah. And I think another thing too, because I guess both those are related more to the exterior, to the interior. But if you think about like the exterior of the building, I know for JV Fletcher at least, there was, I guess one of the main goals was from Main Street, from the outside, that it would look essentially the same, because that was the historic facade and that was what was kind of valuable to the people in the town who had seen that as they drove by every day. So really trying to maintain that and then integrate the expansion into that existing design from the outside, but then still the inside is refreshed and the finishes are all new and updated. So it's almost like if you looked at it from the outside and didn't go inside the building, you might not realize that there was actually a renovation. I wonder if Jones is like similar.
Yeah, it was a similar thing on Jones because we were getting, we had to satisfy requirements of sort of the town's historical society and their requirements, and also the Massachusetts Historical Society. They got a grant from them, so they had to satisfy what they wanted to see. So they didn't want to see changes to the facade. So you try to make the addition be like almost hidden behind the the existing building. And we had the same issue at the interior as well. They had all this very nice woodwork and bookshelves and wainscoting and things like this that they really wanted to see preserved. And that was sometimes at odds with the way you wanted to lay out a new modern library.
Are there changes that are like absolutely necessary that you would have to make to a historic portion of a building more than just like, I don't know, like aesthetic changes?
Yeah, it kind of depends. In our case, if you happen to come along a building that like wasn't sprinklered or something, you would have to add sprinklers. In our case, we had to add an accessible stair to the existing building, within the existing building. Any sort of non-handicap accessible conditions we had to get variances for. So there's a very nice historic stair as you walk in the front door, and we had to get a variance from the access board over that because we couldn't tear it out. It's beautiful and it's like centerpiece of the building, but it's also totally not code compliant from an accessibility standpoint. So there's certain things that you would have to do, but it depends on the age of the building and the condition that it was. For example, Jones had been renovated several times, as JV Fletcher had. So like some of these updates, if you were coming into a really old building that was totally untouched, there would be a lot of stuff that you would have to do in terms of life safety and systems and all sorts of different aspects.
Yeah, I think the accessibility is a really good point. It's definitely something that came up in JV Fletcher. I think part of it was there were like multiple levels within the building, and some of those weren't necessarily accessible by the elevator that was already in the building. So just making sure that in the new project or the renovation, the levels were kind of simplified to where we made sure that every level can be accessed by someone using the elevator. And then also just the, I guess with the site as well, and just taking their approach at the, having these accessible surfaces that are all around the building, and like the parking approach, and just kind of refreshing that, I guess, because it's such a building that's, and I'm sure same for Jones, but like libraries in general, a lot of people like really, depend on them, use them all the time, and it's really a large use case, and you have to make sure that everyone is, able to use that and use the resources that are there.
Right. In the process of designing a library or in the construction process that you've been going through right now, is there something that really gets into like the down and dirty of, the things you have to do as an architect that people on the outside of this industry might not realize is something that you have to deal with when putting together these projects?
Yeah, I would say that, two things. One, the demands of a modern library versus the demands of a library from the 1920s or the 1890s. In the case of Jones, we had the rooms were very small, and there was the floor plan was very divided up, and the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, who provided a lot of funding for the project, they have requirements about sight lines and everything being very open and you being able to see all the interior parts of the library. So we had to satisfy these conflicting requirements. If you've got a historical commission who doesn't want you to change the interior, and then you've got the MBLC, which wants everything to be sort of open concept, which wasn't a thing in the 20s. And I think JV Fletcher was maybe in its current guise, but originally it was even worse. I think it was like gender segregated reading rooms or something like this. They had they had ladies reading rooms and men's reading rooms.
Really?
Yeah, this was something.
Oh, wow.
I forget who I heard that from. I think it was I think it was the library director who told me that. But
okay.
Yeah, it was like very small and cut up, and since it's had a lot of walls opened
That's really
up.
interesting. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a really good point about the sight lines, because something that I never thought about with libraries, but is like security. And since they are public buildings, anyone can walk in. And I'm not from Massachusetts, so I don't really know Westford and Amherst that well, but compared to like the city of Boston, obviously you probably have a lot of people that can come in and out, and maybe there's more of an emphasis on security. I mean, you would think, but it's just as important like in Westford and in Amherst and these more kind of suburban communities to have that, because you have just the staff walking around and they can only, go so far. And I think in some places they'll have to do rounds and things. So that's definitely something that I never really thought about, because when I'm in libraries, I don't think about that I'm being like surveilled or anything, because it's usually like, oh, I'm reading books, I'm like learning and things. Yeah. It's not that sort of building, but that's still kind of baked into it, I think.
Yeah, and they don't have a huge amount of staff to be, patrolling the place. So they really want to be able to sit at the circulation desk and be able to see, most parts of their area from their seat. Another challenging aspect of these old buildings is the systems. When Jones Library was built in 1927, all it had for systems were steam radiators and electric lights. And that was it. There were no sprinklers. There were no ducts. If you wanted air, you opened a window. So nowadays, of course, we cannot do this. So we need to install big ducts. We need to install sprinkler lines. We need to install data cables. We need to install electrical in big 4-inch round conduits. We've got all sorts of stuff that needs to go in this building that wasn't built for it. And the ceilings of the building are built right up against the underside of the slab. There's literally zero space between the plaster and the structure. So you have no place to run this mechanical equipment. And you have to get very creative with dropped ceilings in certain spaces where you're allowed to, or soffits, or back of house spaces where you can run ducts and access all the rooms that you need to without really spoiling the interior, the historic interior of the building. So that's been a huge challenge on Jones.
Right. Does that just mean like adding a second layer of wall to put the stuff
Well,
behind,
it's usually a ceiling thing.
Ceiling.
So in Jones, we had all this beautiful crown molding around the perimeter, which is also, some of it had hazardous materials that we didn't want to disturb. We wouldn't be able to replicate the molding again in the modern day. So we ended up sort of lowering the center section of the ceiling and leaving a high spot around the edge for the crown molding, but in the middle it would drop down, give us place to run all the stuff we needed to.
Yeah, I think that's ceilings, I guess, are a similar conflict on JV Fletcher, because I think this could apply to other just historic buildings as well. You have levels that kind of already exist that you might be using, or you have the height of the building and datums and things that are already set. And to Dan's point, it doesn't always mean that there's a lot of plenum space because they didn't necessarily run all of the ductwork and all of the infrastructure that we have to today. So that's definitely a similar issue that we've ran into.
Yeah. But I guess in the end, it seems like even though there are issues with restoring and working around a historic building, these buildings are important enough to their community that they're willing to, invest in.
Yes,
time
yeah,
spent.
For sure.
And just sort of for the being culturally important, like they have details that are now not possible to reproduce, or not possible to reproduce for any reasonable amount of money. So you want to preserve these historic interiors that are, once they're all gone, like they're all gone. So I'm sorry, my voice broke there. I actually get choked up when I talk about that. Like it makes me a little emotional about losing all our old buildings, but I guess that's why I work here.
Yeah, I think some of the spaces, because JV Fletcher also has some historic like wood trim and ornamentation that we're also protecting, but it's interesting because when you go into the building now, it's under construction, so some of those areas are almost quarantined off from the rest of the site, especially when they've had to take off literally the back half of the building. So they have to really make sure that all of that is fully kind of secured and kept away from the rest of the open air, just so it can be protected. And that's definitely, I guess, an important. It'd be really, I think, interesting to see when both of these projects are done, when you kind of move between the new and the old spaces, and then see how there's some common threads that tie them together.
Yeah, and that's an important design aspect too, is not trying to sort of fake it like you're making a new old building.
Mm-hmm.
When you move into the new space, it's obvious that you moved into the new space from the design language.
Right. You don't always want to like recreate the same molding, for example.
Disney World phenomenon.
When you're designing a building, you don't really know what the walls, you kind of know like where the walls are and how they look, but you might not know exactly how much is in the building until you start tearing it down. You don't know what can be hidden in there that didn't show up on a drawing in the past, and something like that. Is there an example of this sort of unforeseen circumstance for either Jones or JV Fletcher that you kind of want to share? Just some, it doesn't have to be like super serious.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It could be fun.
Was it this old house, like if walls could talk, or is that something else? Am I combining things? It just reminds me of that, because now that you're like actually taking the walls down, the other walls are talking to you.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is what happened.
Screaming.
Yeah. So who knows when it happened, but I think one for JV Fletcher, there was, I guess, some finished walls that we took down because they were going to replace the finishes, just like drywall. And then when they exposed that, there was this really big kind of hole that no one knew about in the masonry wall of the existing building. Though it's been called the shark bite because it almost looks like a shark just kind of came up and like took a chunk out of the building. But it was filled in, so we had to work with like the contractor, the structural engineer. Everyone was kind of all hands on deck, like going to the site, looking at this, going back and forth, like with questions to find the best way to resolve it. And so it was filled in with just new CMU, like concrete masonry block. So it was resolved, but it was definitely something that at the time, like no one really would have known about because you don't have like X-ray vision, I guess, to see through the wall and to know that happened. And it does kind of raise the question of like what happened, yeah, to lead to that, because
was it
very irregular. So
there have been a bunch of things on Jones, and part of it is because, again, these buildings that have been renovated several times. So in the case of Jones, there's a beautiful double height space with a barrel vaulted ceiling in there. And at some point in, I think, the 1960s, they decided they wanted another floor. So they just built a second floor within this double height space. And then at some later point, they demolished it. But it had columns that went all the way down to the basement to support this new second floor. And when they demolished the second floor, they just cut them off at the first floor level. So there were hidden bonus columns that we didn't know about in the basement. And when they started opening up walls, these things showed up. They dug up the floor slab down there and found another floor slab about 2 feet below the active floor slab. And we have no idea when that was done or why. It doesn't show up on any of the historical plans. So yeah, you find all sorts of stuff, and especially if it's got a history of having been redone several times, you find artifacts. There's a lot of detective work, actually.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of a fun aspect of doing these buildings.
I think so. That's an interesting way to put it. We have, and I'm sure Jones probably does as well, there are some historic drawings like that have been scanned. I think we do have at least for JV Fletcher, the original blueprints from like 1895. What's kind of neat to see about those is they're very different compared to like how we would draw and notate drawings today. There's not a lot of information. I think part of that is because the
a lot of stuff got figured out in the fields.
The tradespeople had a lot of freedom, I guess, to kind of do what they needed to do on the buildings. But yeah, it does leave sometimes some uncertainty, and you can't always like track exactly what happened when you get out to the field.
Yeah. And those drawings that you get are often the design drawings, and they did things differently. You know, you'll find out this column that you thought was 4 inches in diameter is actually 8 inches in diameter. You know, who knows why they did that? If they just that's what they had lying around, or they did an analysis and decided it needed to be bigger.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sort of just recreational postulating about why did they do it this way? What were they thinking? And I'm sure in 100 years, if they tear this building apart, they'll say the same things about us.
Maybe. Yeah.
That's true. I imagine everything is going to change a lot in another 100 years.
Yeah.
Even 50 years with the way that people build buildings. Yeah. I wanted to ask just one final question that's like a fun question that I've been asking everybody so far, which is if you have any memories or just like, I don't know, sentiment about a public library that you went to either growing up or now as an adult that, you know, make you feel like, oh, this is why a library is so important for any community.
Yeah, the town library where I grew up in southern New Hampshire was built by some industrialists in the late 19th century, and it was a very nice little stone library, but it was tiny little building and just crammed full of books. And I don't know, I spent a lot of like time after school there and just time on my own in the building. But at the time I didn't really think about the building. I just thought about the user experience of the books inside of it and how sort of cramped it was. So I don't know if that's like informing my current feelings about libraries, but I can see a lot of parallels between that building and the buildings that we're working on today, these other historic libraries.
Yeah, I think similarly when I was experienced libraries, I guess up until working maybe at Finegold Alexander and actually working on a library, I don't think I was as aware of the like the inner workings and what was kind of behind the designs. Thinking back to, I guess, the small town library that I had growing up, was kind of, yeah, I just have some memories of going there with my mom and my sister and like hanging out in the computer lab area or like checking out books and going through the shelves. But I think it's really neat now to, I guess, have a chance to kind of make or help make that sort of space for people to have that experience now, like in different places, especially with these two projects. I think for JV Fletcher, at least, we've had a couple of ceremonies we've gone to, and then there's been the state representative, I think, for the town of Westford has been there, and then he's talked about like how he went to that library when he was a kid and would like go through and like study after school, things like that. And I think actually the landscape architect for JV Fletcher, I think she grew up in Westford, and so she also has memories of like using that library and using that space. So I guess it's just part of like the, like schools and libraries. I feel like almost not everybody, but a lot of people have experienced like those spaces like in their life or have some time they spend in those types of buildings. So I think it's it's rewarding, I guess, to be working on that type of project that can be, I guess, enjoyed and used by such a large amount of people.
Yeah, and it is interesting to me how there's still so, even in this time of like all the knowledge of human history being available online at your fingertips, they're still very important to the community. And I have a niece who's 4, and she lives in Brooklyn, but when they come up to visit our house in Newburyport, which is actually an old Finegold Alexander project, Newburyport Public Library, that's like one of the things she wants to do. And not just like, oh, do you want to go to the library? Like she'll ask us to go to the library. So even for little modern kids who are used to iPads and television shows and whatnot, the library is still very valuable to them.
Yeah. I feel like it's a testament to even just like the staff at the library for being able to curate a place like that everybody just wants to go to and wants to enjoy.
I think they're definitely the all-stars, I guess, of at least for, I know, I'm sure for Jones as well, but for JV Fletcher, the main librarian has been there for, I think, 50 years. And he's like really like the hero like of that library, and was seeing all of these different people go through, and it really makes it, work and makes it such a welcoming and useful place for people. Yeah. So that's a really good point.
That's very interesting that she's been there for 50 years, because
I think so.
That means she was there before most of these renovations happened back in the...
Yeah, at least the 1980s one, because she actually shared, because we were talking about the drawings, like the historic drawings don't always show everything, but there was one thing that came up, and then the structural engineer, about the structure, and then the structural engineer sent us, the contractor sent us a picture of the renovation construction, in the 1980s, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, where'd you get that from? And then he's like, oh, the librarian had all of these photos because she was there.
She took herself.
Yeah, she probably took herself, showing some of the construction, and that one of those photos was trying to see where a beam, how tall a column was, and you could see the column in the photo. It's okay, that's how tall it is, because it doesn't go as high as it might have been. So
primary sources.
Yeah, so that is definitely something pretty interesting about that, I guess.
Well, it sounds like you both really enjoy working on the library so far.
Yep.
Which is good to hear. But I think those are all the questions that I had. Is there anything else that you want to add that we might have missed over?
So,
yeah, I don't think I have anything. Thank you for having us.
Cool. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for listening to What's the Scope with Finegold Alexander Architects. This episode was produced and edited by Madison Mercado with music from the YouTube Music Library. Tune in next week to hear how we tailor each library's design to the diversity of the communities the firm serves. Find us at faainc.com and connect with us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Finegold Alexander Architects. See you next week.